Hi, everybody. My name's Megan. I'm one of the Writing and Study Skills tutors at the ILC, and today I want to talk with you about promoting originality in your writing, or how to prevent plagiarism, which is a very important thing to consider as you write. First thing that we're going to do is take a moment to take a little pre-test. It's just a little survey to see what you already know about this topic. So go ahead and pause the video now and take this quiz just to see what you currently know about plagiarism, and then start it back up once you've finished. All right, so the first thing I want to talk with you about for the presentation is what brings you here today. There are many different aspects to plagiarism. So think about for yourself if there's a specific incident that has brought you here, a specific question that you had, or if you're just interested in learning more about what plagiarism is and how you can avoid it. And think about what you already know about plagiarism, or think you know about plagiarism. So take a moment to think about that. And as we're going through, think about what you already knew and how maybe things are a little different from what you expected. And think about, as you watch this presentation, how you can use this information for your classes, whatever class it might be. So first, I want to give a broader definition, perhaps, of what plagiarism is. And first, going to start with an example from your own perspective. What if someone stole a social media post? What if you posted something on Twitter or Instagram and you thought it was very clever, very interesting, and someone just took it and maybe they changed a couple words, but they posted it on their own as though it was their own post? Probably wouldn't like that very much because you'd think, well, that was my idea. You can't just take it. So that is true of plagiarism. Um, Changing a few words doesn't make something any less stolen. And the same is true of any time in your own writing where you're taking someone else's ideas and not giving them credit. So it's not just taking an entire paper, or it's not just having someone else write your paper, though of course those are examples of plagiarism. But it's any time when you use someone else's words or ideas without giving credit. And I say without giving credit because citations, that means citing something that you've used, that is how you can avoid plagiarism to an extent. And we're going to talk about that example in a little bit. So a little interaction here from the audience. Here are several things that one might think of as plagiarism or not. So I want to take a minute and just discuss this really quickly. So the first example here, websites or programs that check grammar. So Word, Grammarly, are those plagiarism if you use those resources?
That doesn't feel like plagiarism because that's just making my spelling right. I could find that out online. I feel like I'm not using someone else's work and calling it mine.
That's a great point. You're not taking someone else's ideas. You're not taking someone else's words. Something like Grammarly or Word, it's just correcting what you have already said. Now, that being said, some instructors may say don't use Grammarly. So it's always important to refer to your instructor. But typically, we in the ILC would not call that plagiarism. So what about copying or buying a paper online?
Well, that's definitely plagiarism because that's taking someone else's work, a paper I didn't write, and trying to pass it off as mine. That's plagiarism for sure. I know that.
Absolutely, absolutely. What about pasting from a source? So maybe it's a source that you're required or allowed to use from your class and you forget to cite it.
That feels more like an accident. Can accidents still be plagiarism?
Absolutely, because your instructor doesn't know. Maybe you did intend to cite it, but
Mm.
you just forgot. You turn that paper in. Now all your instructor sees is a huge block of text or a few sentences directly from another source, and there's no citation. So for all they know, you did it on purpose. So it's really important to make sure that you cite, even if you're doing something that you're supposed to do. If you don't cite it, it still looks like plagiarism when your instructor sees it. What about getting assistance from the ILC?
I feel like that can't be plagiarism or they wouldn't allow you guys to exist.
It's a very good point. Absolutely. So the only time when it is not allowed to get assistance from the ILC is when it's specifically told to you by your instructor, do not go to the ILC for this. So for example, some final essays, quizzes, tests, things like that. That would be the only time when it would be against the rules to go see the ILC. But the tutors in the ILC, the writing tutors, are specifically trained so that they're going to help you get your ideas across, not to give you ideas to put into your paper. So absolutely, going to see ILC is a good choice. Forgetting to use quotation marks.
Doesn't that just turn a quote into a paraphrase?
So, a paraphrase, and we're going to talk a little more about this later. A paraphrase is really, you have to put this in your own words. You can't just not put quotes around it and call it a paraphrase, or you can't just change a couple of words and call it a paraphrase. A paraphrase really needs to be your own way of expressing. So, even if you cite it, so you put the author's last name and page number, um, if you don't use quotation marks, that is still an incorrect use of citation. You want to put quotation marks around any direct quote. Paraphrasing incorrectly. So, here we're getting into it. So, changing a few words isn't enough. So, would that be considered plagiarism?
I guess it would.
And some instructors might be more strict than others. Some may not call it plagiarism, but they may, say, oh, you've cited this incorrectly. But some may be a little more strict about it. And say, for example, you have a paragraph of text and then you have a citation at the end of that paragraph. There's no way for your instructor to know what of that is your words, what of that came from a source. If they were to put that paragraph into Turnitin or Safe Assign or another program that checks for plagiarism, it'll highlight the words that come directly from a source. And so your instructor will be able to see, oh, they didn't actually paraphrase this. They just took it word for word, or they took it mostly and then changed a word here or there. So absolutely, that can still be considered plagiarism. Now, this is a tricky one, reusing old papers without permission.
But if I wrote it, isn't that my work? I don't have to cite my own work, right?
So, like I said, this is a really tricky one. And this is one of those ones that in the world of academia, it might be a little different than, say, you're a writer for a social media blog or a writer on a website. Often, unless it's specifically outlined in your contract, your articles are your own and you can do whatever you want with them. But when it comes to academia, the papers that you're writing for a class are there specifically to help you learn in that class. So if you're like, oh, well, I read Jane Austen when I was in high school, I'll just turn in the same paper. It's going to save you a lot of effort, but you won't have actually learned the principles in that class. You're just recycling old learning. So it's not actually measuring how you're doing in that class. So, yes, technically, that is still plagiarism. And you could get a bad grade or an F on a paper that you turn in that you previously submitted. So that's definitely one of those ones where you can talk with your instructor about it. If maybe there's some ideas from a previous paper that you want to use, you could talk to them about it. It's that without permission that's so important. You always want to talk with your instructor about what you're thinking. Maybe they'll let you use it and let you cite yourself, but you'll never know if you don't ask. Having a friend help write your paper.
I guess it depends how much they help. Like if she told me I spelled decision wrong every time I use the word decision, I don't think that's plagiarism. But if she
Yeah.
wrote my introductory paragraph, that's probably plagiarism.
Absolutely. And that goes into the next point, having a friend or family member point out parts of your essay that are confusing or need revision. So that is okay to have a reader, someone read your paper, give you some suggestions of parts that, you're like, you know what, I was really unclear about this section, or you misused your commas in this part. That's okay. But having someone, yeah, help you. And I've absolutely worked with some students in the writing center where they're like, oh, yeah, well, my mom wrote it, but it's my ideas. It's like, not really giving an accurate representation to your instructor of your abilities as a writer. If you have someone else write it for you, even if it's your own ideas, now you're taking their words, might be your ideas, but you're taking their words, so it's still plagiarism. So, aside from these options that are often, we just talked about kind of in person, working with someone else, um, turning in someone else's paper as your own, Now, the internet has even more creative options for plagiarism, and a lot of websites. I have seen this. I don't know if you've seen it, but a lot of websites even paint it in a very positive light. They say things like, "Oh, we're going to help you with your studies. We're going to help you get a good grade." But really, what they're doing is they're helping you plagiarize. So, websites that can change around the words in sources, so helping you to paraphrase it, um, websites that offer papers for purchase, using Google Translate to write an entire paper, using ChatGPT or other AI, all those things, again, without getting permission from your instructor, all of those are considered plagiarism because again, it's not your own words. It's not giving an accurate representation of your own abilities. Now, for example, if you need to use Google Translate because your native language isn't English and you need to look up a word or two here and there, that's fine. You're using that as a tool. Just like if you use a thesaurus to find a new word that you want to use, as long as you know that word, don't just put in random words if you don't know them. Um, Using these tools here and there can be fine. Again, especially if you're unsure about your level of usage, you should always ask your instructor. But using these things as tools is fine. The problem is when it becomes the majority of your paper or any large percentage of each paragraph. Um, and no website that offers papers for purchase, that's never okay. That is always plagiarism. Again, even if it's your own ideas and you're giving this website your ideas, it's still plagiarism because you're taking those words. So don't be tempted by these creative options to help you with your academics because it really isn't. It's not going to help you to actually learn the content that you're here for. And if you don't learn the content in one class and you move to a higher level class, you'll find yourself even more lost and the situation will just get worse. So it's best to just learn the content in each class. That way, it's not going to pile up on you as you go along in your degree. So not only is this, morally wrong, and not only does it sabotage your own creative thought and your own evolution as a student, it's also a violation of Wake Tech policy. And the punishments can be quite severe. You could get a 0 for the assignment. You could get an F for the course. And all these things are justified. It's not like an instructor has it out for you. It's very important that academic institutions maintain a high level of credibility and authority in these areas. If everyone's graduating from Wake Tech and they plagiarized all their papers and they go out in the workforce and they don't know how to do anything, that looks really bad for Wake Tech. So it's really important, and all the students who graduate from there. So it's really important that an institution maintains a high level of um, of integrity with relation to these topics. So it's really important that the school looks at this very seriously. So it's important for you as a student to understand this policy so that you can uphold it, so that you have a high level of integrity too. So what to cite? We talked about citations earlier. That's giving credit for using someone else's words or ideas. Um, it might vary depending on the class. If you're unsure, you should always cite a source. If you don't have a chance to ask your instructor, you should always cite. Um, but what you cite may vary, like I said. So, for example, if you're in a high level nursing class, you might not to cite you might not need to cite some of the basic details that you learned very early on in your nursing degree. But if you're in a lower level class, your instructor might expect you to cite more often because those ideas have not yet been integrated into your mind and be taken as your own ideas. They want to make sure they know where you were getting that information from. So again, unsure, always ask. The ILC can help with that. The library can help with that. There's a lot of resources on campus that can help you determine when to cite. But unsure, cite it. That's always the best way to go about it. So I mentioned before about being a writer with integrity. Um, and part of the reason that we have this whole citation system and this way of integrating other people's sources is because as a student, in a college level class, you are a scholar. And when you're writing papers, you are participating in a community of scholars. Um, Especially as you're getting more higher level in your degree, you might be doing original research. And as a result, it's important that you give credit to the people you got that information from that helped you to write your original research, just as you would want someone to cite your paper if they were to use it in their own original research. So it's important for you to think about writing academically or even not academically. If you're writing on a social media page or an online blog, all of that is adding your voice to the conversation. The conversation that exists out in the internet or in magazines and journals that are published, you're adding your voice to that. So it's really important that you have integrity as you do that. And as a result, you need to make sure that you're always giving credit to others in that field, in that area, because as you may know from friends of yours, family members, people who can't be trusted, you're not likely to want to work with them again. So, if, for example, again, I'm using the idea about nursing, if you're someone in the nursing field and you can't be trusted to cite your sources, people aren't going to want to work with you. It's a lack of integrity. So, you're going to cite because you want to add your voice to the academic conversation. You want to be a community member in your field. So, documentation is a word we use to talk about citing sources. So, there are several aspects that you need to consider when you're documenting your sources. Um, First, you want to make sure you keep an accurate list of all the sources that you use in a paper. You don't want to lose track of sources that you used. So make sure that you keep either a list of those website links, you print it out and keep them in one place. You um, copy and paste the URLs into your paper immediately so you don't forget what came from where, because that could also be considered plagiarism. If you're citing one thing, but the quote comes from something else, you have failed to give credit to the source. You want to use in-text citations, and that means in MLA format, that's putting the name and page number in parentheses after your source that you cited. In APA, the name and year. We've got a lot of resources to help with how to cite in specific sources. Again, that's something the ILC can help with, or your instructor. They can let you know, how am I supposed to cite this? What exactly is the format? But it's usually going to be something like that, parentheses with the last name and year or last name and page number. And finally, signal phrases. You don't just want to drop sources down the middle of your paper and leave them there. You want to indicate what this is that you're citing. Um, so as I said, record the sources as you go. Whenever you put information from a source into your paper, cite it right away. That way it'll save you some time. You don't have to spend hours citing everything. Cite it as you go. That way it'll be a little chunk of information rather than having to do it all in one place at the end. So when you integrate sources into your paper, there are several times when it's a good idea to put sources into your paper. Um, when you're citing, you want to make sure that there's a reason for you to cite. Your paper should always be the majority your own ideas. The sources are there to either bolster your opinion with the source's reputation. So, for example, if you say XYZ and the New York Times also says XYZ, that makes it make sense that you're saying that. You're saying, oh, my opinion is supported by this source. You might want to present some facts or statistics to help support your point. So this could mean going to a government website and looking up the percentage of XYZ incidents that have occurred in the country. Those facts and statistics always need to be cited, and those are there to help, again, bolster your voice to show that you have done your research and you know what you're talking about. You can also use a source to identify alternative opinions and explanations. So you give your opinion, and then you can say, however, some people believe this, and you can show that opposition. That's another good place to use sources. And another reason that it's important to cite is because Now your readers, people who read your paper and they're like, wow, this is a fascinating topic. Where can I learn more? They can scroll down to your works cited page or your references page and they can see where you got the information and they can read further. So, as I said, you don't want to just drop a quote down in your paper and leave it there. You want to have signal phrases to show why this information is being included. So, using something like the source's name or the title of the work, some background information, the credibility of that source, all of those things are good ways to integrate. So, for example, you could say something like, noted film expert John Smith found that most people enjoy horror movies. If you just said John Smith, people don't know who's he? Why should I care? But if you say noted film expert, it's like, oh, okay, he's a film expert. And again, they can always scroll down to the bottom of your paper and learn more about this person. So, any thoughts, any questions, anything that we might want to clarify as we wrap up?
I had a professor say once that it was really important to include a expert's credentials when you're introducing
Mm.
them. What counts as a credential and what doesn't count as a credential?
That's a great point. And some instructors are going to have specific guidelines of what they want you to include in these signal phrases. So always be sure that you're checking your assignment sheet to see what the instructor requires. So one example of a credential could be this National Media of Arts winner. It could be someone saying that someone has a doctorate degree in physics, someone who is a college professor at a certain institution, that would be a credential. Um, Someone who has studied a lot in a field. So, for example, if you're writing a paper about ancient Egypt, you might cite an Egyptologist, and you might say that this person has been studying ancient Egypt for 30 years. That would be a credential as well. And sometimes it may not. So say if you've got a book and it's got an author's name, it may not say their credentials in the book. You might have to do a little more searching to find out. But usually if you do a Google search about an author, you can find out some more information about them. That's a great question. Anything else?
Once I find that information about the author on Google, do I have to cite that?
So, great question. So, one of the things that you generally don't have to cite is something that's called common knowledge. And common knowledge is something that's just a fact. So, the fact that, in this case, that Stephen King is a National Media of Arts winner, you may not have known that when you went out to search, but that's not any one person's idea. That is just a fact. You could find that published in many different places. Um, it's no one person's idea or words. Now, if you took a sentence from a website and you copied it word for word that talked about him being a National Media of Arts winner, then you would need to cite that. But that's only because you copied and pasted. If you just use that idea, then it's okay. So some other examples are Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. The Civil War took place between these years. Um, President Joseph Biden is the current president of the United States. All of those are things that are just considered common knowledge. You don't have to cite them. So, yeah, something that you might find in a Google search that is just, again, a fact, you don't necessarily have to cite that unless you copy and paste those words directly. So, it's always a good idea to paraphrase it, put it in your own words. Don't just swap a couple words around, completely write it in your own voice. Great question. Anything else? All right. So, parting thoughts. First, play it safe. If you're unsure, always cite it. And if you don't know how to cite in the specific field that you're in, you don't know those expectations, it's never a bad idea to ask. Your instructors are there to answer your questions. So always ask your instructor if you're ever unsure. Or you can go see the library, you can come to the ILC. We're all here to help you figure out how to cite things in the way that's expected in your class. Next, you want to make sure you keep track of all the sources that you use in a paper. I have seen some student papers with like 15 sources. So when you have that many sources, you've got to make sure you're tracking which one came from where. I've also been in appointments with a student where they're like, uh-oh, I don't know where this came from. And then it's this frantic search to try and figure out. So always keep track of it. whether it's through highlighting or putting numbers next to the quotes or just citing it immediately, whatever method you use, you want to make sure you're keeping track of those citations. And finally, use the resources that are available. You're already paying for it as part of your tuition. You pay for the ILC, you pay for the library already. So come and see us. That's what we're here for. It's not a negative thing. Coming to see the ILC, going to the library, it's not saying you're a failure as a student. It's saying that you're a student who really cares and are invested in your learning. So it's really important to utilize the resources that are available to you. All right, so now you get a chance to test your knowledge. You're going to take that same questionnaire again, and you'll see how you have retained the information that you have taken in during this presentation. So it's really important that you take this questionnaire. Yes, question.
Why does it matter if we take this questionnaire or not? I don't like doing extra work. This is boring. Don't make me do this. Why are we doing this?
So part of the way colleges and universities keep themselves held to that high standard that I mentioned is by collecting data to make sure that they're being effective. So the ILC is collecting data to make sure that we are effectively giving information to students. So when you take that pretest and that post-test, we can look at how you have improved and we can determine whether we are actually getting the information across in a way that makes sense. So please take it. Help us out. It's good for you because you can decide. You can see, oh, yeah, I did learn something.
Okay.
And it's good for us. It really helps.
Thanks, Miss Megan. Good presentation.
Thank you. So go ahead and at the end of this video, take that questionnaire. And we hope to see you again in the ILC sometime. Bye.